Hi, I'm Betsy Rosenfeld with the Center for Governmental Studies. This is Proposition Preview 2008. We're right now on No on Prop 3. Kirk Euler, representing the National Tax Limitation Committee, is with me. Thank you so much for joining us.
Hey, my pleasure. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Okay, let's get started with why Californians should vote no on Prop 3.
Well, the obvious answer is here in California, we're blessed. We as voters are blessed that we have the initiative process, that when our legislature falls asleep at the wheel, something that's critical to us as the citizens, we have the ability to rise above the legislature, go past the governor, and use the initiative process to redress grievances, if you will, that the legislature may not. And good examples of the use of the initiative process are those that focus in on limiting the size of government when government gets too big. Term limits, of course, was passed through the initiative process. But what we've seen more and more, and Prop 3 is a perfect example of it, what we've seen more and more is the hijacking of the citizens' initiative process by special interests who are able to put up $1 million, $2 million to get something qualified for the ballot that has a wonderful sounding name like Hospitals and Healthcare for Children, that is really nothing other than a thinly veiled money grab by these special interests. In this case, you have some hospital administrators who basically made an investment decision. We're going to put up a couple $1 million to qualify for something for the ballot that, if we get passed, is going to return $1 billion back to us. Oh, and by the way, that's $1 billion tax-free that we don't have to pay. We don't have to pay it back. It'll be incumbent upon the taxpayers to pay it back. These are private businesses that stand to gain here.
Let's get specific because it's important for the viewers to understand both sides.
Sure.
And tell me the most important arguments against Prop 3, specifically the problems with it.
Sure. Well, the problems, again, this ballot argument or the ballot proposition was written to tug at the heartstrings of the voters to say, we're building hospitals for children, when in fact that's not really the case. The way the ballot is the proposition is actually written says that the funds from this bond, almost a $1 billion bond that with interest paid off will actually be $2 billion cost to the taxpayer, that this bond can be used for construction of new facilities. It can also be used for retrofitting existing facilities or remodeling existing facilities. It can also be used for buying new equipment. It can also be used for refinancing existing facilities. So essentially, it is a bunch of private business folks saying to the taxpayer, we think you ought to give us a $1 billion grant. It's really what this boils down to. It's a $1 billion grant to private business. It's done under the guise of children.
Okay. The biggest opponents, who is with you against?
Well, it's largely boiled down once again to us taxpayer organizations. You know, these days we seem to be busy on a number of fronts. As you know, we just finished a protracted budget battle where obviously we had to be engaged. But you know, unfortunately, it is a David versus Goliath type of scenario. Here we are underfunded. We aren't able to write the kinds of checks that executives from hospitals can write. And
what do you say to those people who are writing the checks? What do you say to the other side's arguments specifically? Well,
their arguments are kind of the mom and apple pie arguments of, well, kids need hospitals, kids get sick, well, you're right. Kids also need clothes. Should we have a bond measure to fund Baby Gap? Because Baby Gap does, you know, kids need food. How about a bond measure for Gerber so that Gerber can go build a new manufacturing plant so that we can get more strained peas into our little ones? It's the exact same argument. Kids need food, they need clothes, they need house. How about a bond measure for Lennar? And Lennar is going to use that money to go out and build homes that come with cribs and nurseries because kids need homes. You could take this any direction. Really, at the heart and soul of this argument, it is simply private enterprise saying to the taxpayer, we want a $1 billion subsidy.
So what would be the biggest impact on California if this passes or doesn't pass?
If it passes, it's just yet more debt. And you know, ironically, it wasn't too long ago that a $775 million bond measure was passed for this very same purpose. They still have approximately half of that money available to them for their improvements that they argued, I believe it was in 2002, that they argued they needed. They still have half that money available to them, and yet here they go grabbing for another $1 billion. So if it doesn't pass, you know, we get to keep a little bit more money in our pockets.
Thank you. Thank you so much for joining us. We have a lot of information for all the voters to weigh, and thanks again.
My pleasure. Thank you for having me.